The clock neared midnight, and I found myself alone in the old lighthouse. The storm outside was raging, waves crashing violently against the rocky shore, matching the tumult within me as I tried to concentrate on my research. The oppressive silence of the night made the task even more daunting. The lighthouse had stood for over a century, guiding ships safely to shore, but it had been abandoned for decades. My fascination with maritime history had brought me here. I wanted to document the stories of this once vital beacon. As the rain lashed against the windows and the wind howled through the cracks in the old structure, I couldn't shake the feeling that the lighthouse still held some of its old secrets. I sat at the large wooden desk in the keeper's quarters, poring over old logs and charts by the light of an oil lamp. The room was filled with the musty scent of aged paper and damp wood. Suddenly, a loud bang shattered the silence, making me jump in my seat. My heart pounding, I cautiously approached the source of the noise. Turning a corner, I was met with a sight that sent shivers down my spine. A flickering light and a shadowy figure lurking in the dimness. I tried to rationalize that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Yet, as I continued to work, more unsettling occurrences began to unfold. Objects moved inexplicably, whispers filled the air, and a sense of dread settled over me like a suffocating blanket. It became clear that I was not alone in the lighthouse that night. The first instance happened when I noticed the lighthouse keeper's journal, which I had left on the desk, had moved to the windowsill. I distinctly remembered placing it back on the desk after reading through it. The journal contained entries dating back to the early 1900s, detailing the keeper's day-to-day activities, the ships that passed by, and even some strange sightings. One entry, in particular, caught my eye. April 14, 1912. Heard strange noises again tonight. It sounded like someone was calling my name from the shoreline. Went out to check, but found nothing. Could it be the spirits of the drowned sailors? The entry sent a chill down my spine, especially since tonight I too had heard faint whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. I continued my research, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease. Hours passed, and the storm outside intensified. The wind howled louder, and the waves crashed harder against the rocks. I was deeply engrossed in an old map when another loud crash echoed through the building, this time accompanied by the sound of shattering glass. My heart raced as I made my way to the source of the noise. I found the window in the kitchen shattered, glass shards scattered across the floor. The cold wind blew in, making the room feel even more eerie. As I looked around, I saw the shadowy figure again, this time closer. It was standing near the doorway, its form barely discernible in the dim light. I froze, my mind racing with fear and curiosity. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper, my voice trembling. The figure didn't respond, but seemed to fade into the darkness. I took a deep breath and decided to confront my fears head-on. I wasn't going to let a shadow scare me away from uncovering the lighthouse's secrets. I spent the next few hours meticulously searching the lighthouse. In the attic, I found an old trunk covered in dust. Inside were photographs, letters, and a diary belonging to the original lighthouse keeper, a man named Thomas Granger. His diary entries were filled with accounts of strange occurrences, similar to what I had been experiencing. He wrote about hearing voices, seeing shadows, and feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. One entry stood out. June 23, 1913. I am not alone here. The spirits of the drowned sailors have come to claim the lighthouse. They whisper to me, tell me to leave, but I cannot abandon my post. I must keep the light burning for the ships at sea. Thomas's words resonated with me. He had faced the same fears and had stood his ground. As I delved deeper into the trunk, I found a letter addressed to Thomas from a woman named Eliza, presumably his wife. She wrote about their son, Henry, who had died tragically at sea. The letter was filled with grief and despair. and it became clear that Thomas was haunted not only by spirits, but also by the loss of his son. With this newfound knowledge, I felt a strange sense of connection to Thomas and his struggles. I decided to stay the night in the lighthouse, determined to uncover the truth. I set up a cot in the keeper's quarters and tried to get some sleep, but the whispers and shadows continued to plague me. Around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by the sound of footsteps echoing through the halls. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously followed the noise. The footsteps led me to the top of the lighthouse, where the light still rotated, casting eerie shadows on the walls. There, standing by the railing, was the shadowy figure. As I approached, the figure became more distinct. It was a man, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, with a solemn expression on his face. I realized it was Thomas Granger. His eyes met mine, and I felt a wave of sadness and longing wash over me. "You must leave this place," Thomas said, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. "The spirits of the sea are restless, and they will not rest until the light is extinguished." "I can't leave," I replied, my voice shaking. "I need to understand what happened here." Thomas nodded slowly. "Then you must be prepared for what you will uncover. The truth is not always a comfort." With that, he faded into the shadows, leaving me alone at the top of the lighthouse. I felt a mixture of fear and determination. I knew that uncovering the truth would not be easy, but I was more determined than ever to see it through. As dawn approached, the storm began to subside. The whispers and shadows grew less frequent, and the sense of dread slowly lifted. I spent the rest of the day combing through the lighthouse's records and artifacts, piecing together the story of Thomas Granger and the spirits that haunted the lighthouse. I discovered that Thomas had continued to keep the light burning despite the spirits' attempts to drive him away. His dedication had saved countless ships from crashing on the rocks, but it had also cost him his sanity. In the end, Thomas had taken his own life, unable to bear the burden any longer. The spirits of the drowned sailors, driven by their desire for revenge, had remained trapped in the lighthouse, their restless souls unable to find peace. Thomas's spirit, too, was bound to the lighthouse, forever watching over the light that he had once tended so faithfully. With this knowledge, I performed a small ceremony, lighting a candle and saying a prayer for the spirits of Thomas and the sailors. As the candle burned, I felt a sense of calm settle over the lighthouse. The whispers and shadows ceased, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time since arriving at the lighthouse. In the morning, I packed my things and prepared to leave, feeling a sense of closure and accomplishment. I knew that I had faced my fears and uncovered the truth, and in doing so, I had brought a measure of peace to the haunted lighthouse. As I drove away, I glanced back at the lighthouse, its light still shining brightly. I felt a deep respect for Thomas Granger and the sacrifices he had made. The lighthouse, once a place of fear and dread, now stood as a testament to his bravery and dedication. As midnight approached, I found myself alone in the hotel room. The relentless patter of rain against the windows was the only sound, and the storm outside seemed to reflect my inner turmoil. I tried to immerse myself in my book, but the eerie atmosphere was impossible to ignore. The hotel was an old Victorian building, its grandeur faded but still retaining a certain charm. I had checked in earlier that evening, seeking refuge from the storm during my travels. The receptionist had mentioned that the hotel was known for its history and had even hinted at ghost stories, but I had dismissed it as part of the ambience. A loud crash suddenly echoed through the room, jolting me from my seat. Heart pounding, I cautiously made my way towards the source of the noise. Rounding the corner, I was met with a sight that made my blood run cold, a flickering light and a shadowy figure lurking in the gloom. I tried to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but as I continued to read, more strange occurrences began to unfold. Objects moved by themselves, Whispers filled the air, and a feeling of dread enveloped me like a heavy shroud. It was clear that I was not alone in the hotel room that night. The first sign of trouble was the wardrobe door creaking open on its own. I had firmly shut it after hanging my clothes, yet now it stood ajar, casting long shadows across the room. I approached it cautiously, my heart racing. Inside, my clothes hung undisturbed, but the air felt colder, as if a draft was coming from within the wardrobe itself. I shut the door firmly and returned to my book, determined to ignore the growing sense of unease. But the whispers began soon after, faint at first, then growing louder. They seemed to come from all around me, indecipherable and eerie. I strained to hear the words, but they slipped away like mist. Desperate for a distraction, I decided to take a hot shower. The bathroom was a small, tiled room with an old-fashioned clawfoot tub. As I stepped into the warm water, I felt a momentary sense of relief, but that relief was short-lived. Halfway through my shower, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. I fumbled for the flashlight I had brought with me and managed to find it after a few tense moments. As I shone the beam around the room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A message written in the steam on the mirror. "Get out." I stumbled out of the tub, my mind racing. Was someone in the room with me? I searched the bathroom and the adjoining bedroom, but there was no sign of anyone. The message on the mirror slowly faded, leaving me shaken and terrified. I decided to leave the room and go downstairs to the lobby. As I opened the door, I was met with a blast of cold air. The hallway was dimly lit, and the shadows seemed to dance on the walls. I hurried down the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The lobby was empty, save for the night receptionist, an elderly man with a kind face. He looked up as I approached, concern etched on his features. "Is everything all right, miss?" he asked. I hesitated, unsure how to explain what I had experienced. "I'm not sure," I finally said. "There have been some strange occurrences in my room." The receptionist's expression grew serious. "You're in room 313, aren't you?" I nodded, and he sighed. "That room has a history. Many guests have reported strange happenings there. Some say it's haunted by the spirit of a woman who died tragically in the hotel many years ago." I felt a chill run down my spine. What happened to her? "Her name was Eleanor," the receptionist said. "She was a young woman who stayed at the hotel with her fiancé. On the night before their wedding, he was called away on business, and she was left alone. She was found the next morning, having taken her own life in that very room. Some say she still haunts the hotel, looking for her lost love." The receptionist's story filled me with a sense of dread. "Is there any way to make her leave?" He shook his head. "Eleanor's spirit is restless. She has been here for many years, and it seems she has no intention of leaving." I thanked the receptionist and returned to my room, my mind racing. I knew I had to confront Eleanor's spirit if I wanted any chance of finding peace. I decided to perform a simple ceremony, hoping to communicate with her and offer her some comfort. I lit a candle and placed it on the nightstand. Sitting on the bed, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "Eleanor," I called softly, "if you are here, I want to help you. Please, show yourself." For a few moments, nothing happened. Then, the temperature in the room dropped sharply, and the candle flickered. I opened my eyes and saw a faint, ghostly figure standing by the window. Eleanor was a young woman with long, flowing hair and a sorrowful expression. "I can feel your pain," I said gently. "You lost someone you loved dearly, but holding on to this place is keeping you from finding peace. You need to let go." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, and she seemed to shimmer as if caught between two worlds. "I can't leave," she whispered. He promised he would come back. Your fiancé is gone, I said softly, but you can find peace and move on. You don't have to stay here, trapped by your sorrow. Eleanor's figure began to fade, and the temperature in the room slowly returned to normal. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I will try. The candle flickered one last time and then went out. I felt a sense of relief wash over me. I had done what I could to help Eleanor find peace. As I settled back into bed, the storm outside began to subside, and the whispers and shadows disappeared. The next morning, I checked out of the hotel, feeling a sense of closure and accomplishment. The receptionist thanked me and wished me well on my travels. As I drove away, I glanced back at the old building, its windows reflecting the morning light. I knew that I had faced my fears and helped a lost soul find peace. The haunted hotel room, once a place of terror, now held a sense of calm. Eleanor's spirit had been set free, and I hoped that she would finally find the happiness she had been searching for. Nearing midnight, I found myself alone in the seaside cabin. The roar of the waves against the shore and the howling wind outside mirrored my inner turmoil as I tried to focus on my writing. The eerie atmosphere made concentration almost impossible. The cabin was a small, rustic retreat I had rented for a week, hoping to find inspiration for my next novel. It was situated on a remote stretch of coastline, surrounded by dense forest and accessible only by a narrow, winding road. The isolation was perfect for writing, but as the storm intensified, I began to regret my decision. A sudden, loud thud disrupted the silence, causing me to jump in my seat. My heart racing, I cautiously approached the source of the noise. Turning the corner, I was met with a sight that made my skin crawl, a flickering light and a shadowy figure lurking in the darkness. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination. Yet, as I continued to write, more unsettling events began to occur. Objects moved on their own, whispers filled the air, and a feeling of dread enveloped me like a thick fog. It became evident that I was not alone in the cabin that night. The first sign of trouble came when the old radio on the mantel turned on by itself, playing a static-filled tune. I had to cross the room to switch it off, my heart pounding in my chest. The room grew colder, and I could see my breath misting in the air. I decided to make a cup of tea to calm my nerves. As I stood in the small kitchen, waiting for the kettle to boil, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. The sound of the wind outside was the only noise. I tried to shake off the feeling of being watched and returned to my writing. Hours passed, and the storm outside grew fiercer. The wind howled, and the waves crashed violently against the shore. I was deeply engrossed in my work when another loud thud echoed through the cabin, this time accompanied by the sound of a door slamming shut. My heart raced as I made my way to the source of the noise. The front door, which I had securely locked, was now wide open, rain and wind pouring in. I rushed to close it, my mind racing with fear and confusion. As I turned back into the cabin, I saw the shadowy figure again, standing near the fireplace. It was a man, his features obscured by the dim light. "Who are you?" I managed to whisper, my voice trembling. The figure didn't respond, but seemed to fade into the darkness. I took a deep breath and decided to confront my fears head-on. I wasn't going to let a shadow scare me away from finishing my novel. I spent the next few hours meticulously searching the cabin. In the attic, I found an old trunk covered in dust. Inside were photographs, letters, and a diary belonging to the previous owner, a man named Samuel Hartman. His diary entries were filled with accounts of strange occurrences, similar to what I had been experiencing. He wrote about hearing voices, seeing shadows, and feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. One entry stood out: October 15, 1967. The spirits of the sea have come to claim the cabin. They whisper to me, tell me to leave, but I cannot abandon my home. I must protect it. Samuel's words resonated with me. He had faced the same fears and had stood his ground. As I delved deeper into the trunk, I found a letter addressed to Samuel from his sister, Margaret. She wrote about their brother, Edward, who had died tragically at sea. The letter was filled with grief and despair, and it became clear that Samuel was haunted not only by spirits, but also by the loss of his brother. With this newfound knowledge, I felt a strange sense of connection to Samuel and his struggles. I decided to stay the night in the cabin, determined to uncover the truth. I set up a cot in the living room and tried to get some sleep, but the whispers and shadows continued to plague me. Around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by the sound of footsteps echoing through the cabin. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously followed the noise. The footsteps led me to the beach, where the waves crashed violently against the shore. There, standing at the water's edge, was the shadowy figure. As I approached, the figure became more distinct. It was a man, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, with a solemn expression on his face. I realized it was Samuel Hartman. His eyes met mine, and I felt a wave of sadness and longing wash over me. "You must leave this place," Samuel said, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. "The spirits of the sea are restless, and they will not rest until the cabin is destroyed." "I can't leave," I replied, my voice shaking. "I need to understand what happened here." Samuel nodded slowly. "Then you must be prepared for what you will uncover. The truth is not always a comfort." With that, he faded into the shadows, leaving me alone on the beach. I felt a mixture of fear and determination. I knew that uncovering the truth would not be easy, but I was more determined than ever to see it through. As dawn approached, the storm began to subside. The whispers and shadows grew less frequent, and the sense of dread slowly lifted. I spent the rest of the day combing through the cabin's records and artifacts, piecing together the story of Samuel Hartman and the spirits that haunted the cabin. I discovered that Samuel had continued to live in the cabin despite the spirits' attempts to drive him away. His dedication to his home had cost him his sanity. In the end, Samuel had taken his own life, unable to bear the burden any longer. The spirits of the drowned sailors, driven by their desire for revenge, had remained trapped in the cabin, their restless souls unable to find peace. Samuel's spirit, too, was bound to the cabin, forever watching over the place he had once called home. With this knowledge, I performed a small ceremony, lighting a candle and saying a prayer for the spirits of Samuel and the sailors. As the candle burned, I felt a sense of calm settle over the cabin. The whispers and shadows ceased, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time since arriving at the cabin. In the morning, I packed my things and prepared to leave, feeling a sense of closure and accomplishment. I knew that I had faced my fears and uncovered the truth, and in doing so, I had brought a measure of peace to the haunted cabin. As I drove away, I glanced back at the cabin, its windows reflecting the morning light. I felt a deep respect for Samuel Hartman and the sacrifices he had made. The cabin, once a place of fear and dread, now stood as a testament to his bravery and dedication. These experiences at the abandoned lighthouse, the haunted hotel room, and the spooky seaside cabin have left an indelible mark on me. Each encounter taught me about courage, resilience, and the power of uncovering the truth. They reminded me that even in the face of fear and the unknown, we have the strength to confront our fears and emerge stronger.